It was supposed to be a routine car theft, just another job for the getaway driver. But everything changed when he saw the face of one of the passengers. It was a face he knew all too well, the face of his own brother. He instantly regretted taking the job. When Tony Montana first met Charlie, they were both young men who had recently been released from prison. They shared the same hometown and the same criminal tendencies, which quickly made them friends. They got involved in several armed robberies together, but their partnership didn't last long, because Charlie had a bad habit of getting caught. After a botched robbery, Charlie ended up in jail again, while Tony went free. Tony started a new life, even began dating a woman named Gina, who eventually became his wife. For a while, it seemed like Tony had finally turned over a new leaf. He stopped committing crimes and started working at a garage as a mechanic. His past was behind him, and he was looking forward to a bright future. But Charlie was still stuck in prison and would often send Tony letters asking for money. Tony ignored those letters, not wanting to help his old friend, but Gina convinced him otherwise. She thought that helping out an old friend was the right thing to do. So Tony started sending Charlie money every month so he could get some luxuries in prison. One day, Tony got a call from Charlie, told his old friend that he was out of prison again and wanted to see him. Tony hesitated but ultimately agreed to meet up. At the bar, Charlie explained that he had a great plan that would make them both rich. All he needed was a getaway driver. Charlie was counting on the fact that Tony couldn't resist the allure of easy money. And he was right. Tony reluctantly agreed to help him out. He drove Charlie and two other men to a local supermarket. Charlie gave the others a bag, and they entered the store. Seconds later, they came out with a bag full of money and ran to the getaway car. Tony started the engine and sped off. As they drove away, Charlie explained that there was one more stop to make. They pulled up outside a house and waited until it was empty. Then they entered and stole expensive jewelry and watches. Once they had what they needed, they left. This was supposed to be the only job Tony did with Charlie. He drove him back to the bar and then went home to his wife. But Charlie had other plans. He told Tony that he had one more task for him, and that was to drive him to the airport. He claimed that he had a family emergency he needed to take care of. On the way to the airport, Charlie told Tony to pull over. He then ordered Tony to hand over the car keys before pushing him out of the vehicle. He had betrayed his own brother, but why? Why did he order Tony to hand over the car keys and throw him out of the vehicle? What did he have planned next? And most importantly, how did Tony escape this dangerous situation? It was evident to Tony that Charlie wasn't planning on returning the car. In fact, the moment he realized what was happening, he knew he wouldn't be seeing his brother alive much longer. With no other options left, Tony did the only thing he could think of. He started running. He ran as fast as he could down the highway, avoiding cars that zoomed by. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he had to keep moving. Eventually, he spotted a gas station in the distance and headed in that direction. Meanwhile, Charlie used Tony's car to buy a ticket and then boarded the plane with the three robbers. As the plane took off, he pulled out a briefcase filled with the stolen goods. They had just successfully completed their first mission. Charlie contacted the rest of the crew after landing and informed them that everything went according to plan. They all decided to meet at a prearranged location to split the profits, but Charlie had something else in mind. Once everyone arrived, he pulled out a gun and announced that he had a few surprises for them. He shot the first man, then turned to the second and asked him where the money was. The second man remained silent, so Charlie shot him too. The third man began to speak, but he never got the chance. Once Charlie pulled the trigger and ended his life as well. With all of the men dead, Charlie emptied the briefcases and divided the money among himself and the three women. He gave each of them $1 million and kept $4 million for himself. The others were grateful for their unexpected windfalls, but none of them knew that Charlie had set them up. After he'd gotten his hands on the money, he vanished, and they were left to deal with the cops. Tony was still running when Charlie landed the plane. He hadn't stopped since he got away from the gas station. He had no idea where he was or where he was going, but he knew he couldn't keep running forever. He eventually found a phone booth and called the police. He told them everything, how he was set up by his own brother. The police believed him and promised to catch Charlie. But Tony knew that he might never see his brother again. Charlie was already gone, and the police hadn't caught him yet. Tony returned home, hoping his wife would be able to help him calm down. He explained what happened to her. She immediately called 911. The police arrived and took Tony's statement. They were doing everything they could to find Charlie, but it was hard because he had no permanent address. Tony knew that if they couldn't find his brother, they'd probably assume he was guilty of the crime. That's why he asked the police if he could go with them on their search. They agreed, and soon they were all in the same police car driving around town. It was obvious that the police weren't willing to let Tony out of their sight, and they didn't want him to know that they suspected him of being involved in the robbery. Meanwhile, Charlie was living the high life, spent his days gambling and partying, and his nights sleeping in different hotels. He had no intention of settling down anytime soon. He was having too much fun being a rich criminal. One night, he was arrested for trying to pay a prostitute with a counterfeit bill. When the police searched him, they found his real ID and soon learned about the robberies. It didn't take long for them to track down Tony and bring him in for questioning. They interrogated him for hours, but Tony swore he was innocent. He told them everything he knew about Charlie, but it wasn't enough evidence to charge him. They let him go, but warned him to stay out of trouble. Charlie was finally brought in for questioning as well. Police had a lot of evidence against him, and soon he was charged with multiple counts of armed robbery. It looked like Tony's ordeal was finally over. But when he heard that his brother was going to jail, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. It meant that he didn't have to worry about Charlie coming after him anymore. At the trial, Charlie testified against his accomplices, knowing that it would save him. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Tony was happy to hear that, but he knew that he had to move on with his life. He went back to work at the garage and tried to put the whole ordeal behind him. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He started seeing a therapist to help him cope with the trauma, but it wasn't enough. He needed to find a way to move on. Finally, he decided to take a vacation and head to Mexico. Booked a flight and told his wife he'd be back in a few days. But he had no idea what he was getting himself into. When he arrived in Mexico, he was greeted by a man with a familiar face. It was one of the accomplices that Charlie had set up. He had followed Tony there to get revenge. The accomplice tried to kill Tony, but he fought back and managed to escape. He fled to the nearest police station, but they didn't believe him. They thought he was just a crazy American who had made up the whole story. Desperate, Tony called his wife and told her everything. She immediately flew to Mexico and helped him get back to the U.S. They were finally safe. In the end, Tony decided to leave his old life behind. He knew that he could never go back to the way things were before. He had experienced too much trauma and had to start over. He moved to a new city with his wife and started a new job. He knew that he would never forget what happened to him, but he was determined to make the best of it. He had lost his brother, but gained a new appreciation for life.